You should know a couple of those.
Okay, everybody knows that the Whitlocks couldn't make it tonight. Because
No!
they didn't want to take the drive and the chances of because of the virus. And Pat was going to speak to us in April, and he was gracious enough to consent to change, so he's here tonight. The Whitlocks will be here in April, so Pat's going to show us how to tie some flies for the white bass tonight.
Absolutely.
Take it away, Pat.
All right, thank y'all for, again, having me. I'm real sorry that Dave and Emily couldn't be here tonight. That's, Jan was telling me that they were, I think, or Dave was the first speaker here that y'all ever had for one of y'all's meetings, so that was kind of a bummer that they couldn't make it, but I'm glad to fill in. I'm real honored to be here on y'all's 50th anniversary. And so tonight my presentation is going to be fly fishing for white bass during the spring spawning run. And so we're going to be tying some flies that I use when I fish by myself or when I fish with clients. And these are some effective patterns that work. I've got some patterns up here that are kind of tied all across this little material clip here that are all kind of stuck in there, and they've got the names of the flies and the inventors of the flies on there.
Can we show that to them?
So basically, if you want to come up and take a look at those anytime, there's several of those. I just kind of consider those Texas. These are all Texas tires that have tied these white bass, particular white bass flies. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them not. But they're all fairly simple ties. But the first pattern that I'm going to tie is basically a version of a Clouser minnow, and this is the fly that I reach for. Probably this fly in this configuration, this size and color is the fly that I reach for about 75% of the time when I'm guiding and when I'm just fishing by myself. It's a very simple tie, and I don't really like the term guide fly, being a guide and a tire. To me, the term guide fly means you just take a chunk of fur, wrap it on a hook, and it takes you 2 minutes. You throw it in the box, and the fly is kind of the afterthought. But to me, the fly is kind of the tip of the spear. It is the last thing that the fish sees before it makes contact. It's kind of like if you bow hunt. We spend thousands of dollars on bows and sights and all kind of other gizmos, but almost kind of as an afterthought is your broadhead and how sharp it is. So the fly is kind of the tip of the spear. So I really don't like the term guide fly, but this is about as close to a guide fly as you can get, but it works. It's very effective. So this is kind of a high tie Clouser, and I'm going to start with some red thread here. This is 210 denier, but you can use 140 and whatever flavor you like, UTC, Danville, whatever. I just run it back a little bit, probably almost to the hook point there, and run it back up. This gives a little spot of red on the fly. And probably about maybe 3 or 4 eye lengths back, I'm going to put on some large black bead chain eyes. I put these on the same way every time, like 5 crossing wraps one way, 5 crossing wraps the other way, then I repeat that step. Make sure it's getting tight, and then I wrap underneath as kind of a tightening wrap. I give it about 5 wraps, and then go over it again 5 times one way, 5 times the other way. I'm done with the back of the fly there, okay? Now for time's sake, I usually put a drop of Zap-A-Gap or Wapsi Z-Mint, some type of super glue, some thin super glue to penetrate these eyes. I really don't like my eyes rolling over. But inevitably they will, especially if they catch a lot of fish or you bang them up against rocks. But tie it on like that, give it some super glue, it ought to hold pretty well. The next material that I'm going to put in is just a couple of strands or a few strands of gold flash. This is holographic gold Flashabou. This is an odd, kind of an odd color clouser that I'm going to tie, and you wouldn't think that it would work, but I promise you it does. And I don't know what exactly they see in this color. I'm going to take one strand of Flashabou, and I've got that folded over. And just put that right up on top of the hook. Right back a few times. Spread that out. Make some go on, two go on one side, two go on the other if I can. Doesn't really matter. It's probably going to get messed up. And I like some of this stuff. This is Raj Flashabou in opal.
Pat, you probably said, but what size hook is that?
I'm sorry, I did not say. That is a Gamakatsu B10S in size 8.
And is it 1X long or a standard length?
It's probably 1X long. It's very similar to a Mustad 3366 kind of in configuration. And that's what I used to tie all of my white bass flies on. But since I started guiding, I have gone to these Gamakatsus because they hook fish sometimes when you don't set the hook. So if I've got anglers who are not very experienced and you know, maybe missing some strikes or whatever, a lot of times the fish will just hook themselves. These things are just scary sharp. I bleed all the time when I tie with them. But the Gamakatsu B10S, this is a size 8. It's very similar to a size 6 in everything else. Okay, so I put in one strand of that opal Flashabou and I folded it over, so I've got 2 strands. So I've got about 6 strands of flash altogether there. Not very much. One of the key features of most Texas white bass flies is that they're very sparsely tied to be effective. And we had Charlie Cypher come to our fly club one time, and he said that he could not sell the trousers that he used for white bass. He could not sell them in stores because people wouldn't buy them because they were just too sparse. And he jokingly said that if you have more than about 7 hairs on a clouser minnow, it's too thick. And he really wasn't that far off, actually. He tied his very, very sparsely. So we're going to take a pretty sparse clump of brown bucktail, maybe a couple of inches long, if that. We're just going to tie it in right there on top, kind of as a high tie method. Wrap it in tightly, red nose on it. Hairs evenly back there. Trim some of our flash up, don't need it too terribly long. Whip finish and we're done. And
So that's all tied on the front of the dumbbell eyes.
yes, ma'am. It sure is. It's tied on top, and there's really nothing on the bottom. It's very sparse. Large bead chain eyes, and if you're fishing this with a sink tip, as you should be, to get down to where the fish are, it's very effective. So there she is right there. It's just a very, very sparse brown clouser minnow with some gold flash. Put a little bit of head sand out on
Do you ever put a little bit of white on it, or always just the brown?
This is just the color that I normally go to. You know, first off, but yes, you can tie this in any different color combination that you like. Whether, you know, white, light blue, chartreuse, yellow works sometimes as well, red over white. But the key is you want enough weight to help the fly get down, but not enough that it's just really, you know, diving toward the bottom if you can help it. And very sparsely tied. You know, a thicker fly is not going to get to the bottom. They just don't seem to work as well. You hear stories all the time when folks will say, they just kept eating my fly until it was just a couple of pieces of flash. Well, there's a fly on here, on these flies that I've tied for y'all. One was tied by Andy Moreau. Unfortunately, he passed away several years back, but he was a guide on the Brazos River near Possum Kingdom. And he tied that fly for the Nolan River. It's called the Moreau fly, and it's this little guy right here. There's the device for those of you on Zoom. And as you can see, that is a 1/64 ounce jig head, 5 strands of pearl crystal flash, and a body wrapped with red 210 thread, and covered with Sally Hansen's hard as nails, and that's the entire fly. And folks swear by this fly on the Nolan River. I don't fish it much, but it has high praises. I can assure you of that. So that's the first fly. The second fly I'm going to tie is this is a fly that I came up with. Oh gosh, I'm not sure how long ago. At least probably 15 years ago, maybe, if not more. But one of the things that I always saw when I was fishing for white bass on the rivers above Lake Waco were the bait fishermen that were fishing from shore on some of the public access areas. They always had a little baggie down beside them, and they were just trying to see what, you know, they were using, because these folks were catching fish. They weren't throwing cork or anything like that. Finally, when I got close enough to see, they were fishing just a plain jig head, and they had minnows, a bag of frozen minnows. And what they were inland silversides, or what people call ghost minnows. And ghost minnows, if you've ever seen them, if you look at them wrong, they die. Okay, they're kind of like shad. They don't live very long. So most people just seined them, put them in a baggie, and they froze them and took them out to use. So I wanted to come up with a fly that imitated the translucency, that big silver stripe, and that big white belly patch of a ghost minnow. And this is a fly, again, that I came up with. It's called Pulp Pat's Ghost Minnow. It's this one right here in the middle. And I've tied this for quite a few clubs and shops and whatnot, and demonstrated it. And it is a killer pattern, especially in crystal clear water. So we're going to start the fly with, this is a UTC Ultra thread. 140, and the color is gray-brown. I like that color, the gray-brown color, because it matches kind of the whole color scheme of the fly. But again, the same hook is number 8 B10S Gamakatsu. Again, we're going to start large black V-chain eyes about 3 or 4 spaces back, or eye lengths back. Those in there fairly tightly. At some point during this, I'm probably going to break my thread. All right. So we've got that, got the eyes tied on. That's just kind of standard practice. This fly does not have a lot of flash in it, other than what is provided kind of by just a couple of pieces of silver flash we're going to put in later, and a little bit of flash in the laser dub belly on it. But we're going to put just a couple of pieces of, this is just pearl crystal flash in the midge size. So it's the small, real small crystal flash. I'm going to fold that around the hook. Tie that back to about the point of the hook. So you can see we've got about maybe 1.5 inches extending back beyond that number 8 hook, which is about going to be the length of the fly. These minnows are, the ghost minnows are rather long, but I'm not sure I tie them quite to scale, but I do try to tie them fairly long. So the next material that I'm going to put in is just a small touch of EP fibers, and this color is called Golden Olive Minnow, and it represents that, or matches, I should say, that translucency of that brownish tan translucency of those inland silver sides of ghost minnows really well. So I'm going to run that about all the way to back to where that flash, that midge flash that I tied in there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tie that, I'm going to tie it just right behind those eyes. I didn't go forward of the eyes, I just tied it right in behind there. And just clip that off right behind the eyes. Okay? Now with the fly still in that position, we're going to add that really distinctive white belly patch that the ghost minnows have. It's just kind of that big, I guess, sac where all the internal organs right behind the gills are. But again, it's quite prominent on that minnow. So basically what I've got is this is just some Sinyo's laser dub in white, and it's got some UV sparkle in it. And what I do is I'll get a hank out and I'll just kind of knead it in my hands like this. Just kind of line those fibers up. And then I'll figure out how much I need, and that's kind of a trial and error thing. Don't want too much. So once I get about what I think is right, so I've got a patch about that big. You can thin it out if you need, if you got too much. So I'm going to put it on kind of where I think it's going to go, and I'm going to take the thread, I'm going to come up under the eye, forward of the eye now, and I'm going to make one wrap. You see what I did? I made one wrap right there in front of that eye. Now, if Sinyo's dub wants to kind of roll around, you can always roll it back up on top of the hook. And just kind of give it a good couple of pulls, and then tug down fairly snugly on it. And take your other half, the other half that's sticking forward of your eye there, and fold it back over. And what I'll do is I'll still wrap maybe 3 or 4 wraps right in front of that. Make sure I've got enough room to tie the rest of my materials in here. And then I'm going to X-wrap over the top of those eyes 2 times, just like that. And what that does is that keeps that Sinyo's folded back. So I'm going to kind of marry those 2 pieces together. And I never really trim this with scissors unless I've got a really long piece or way too long, which means that I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing. So I'll just take my fingernails and just kind of pare it down, and that kind of, it almost acts like, it just feathers the material. So there we go. So now we've got that white belly patch there. Okay. Now we can turn it over, turn the fly over. I'm going to put in that really distinctive silver, stripe. Goes in as half, and we're only going to use one patch. This is it's crinkle mirror flash. I just got a small hank of it here. I don't have the pack. Oops, sorry guys. I don't have the package, but it's silver crinkle mirror flash. This stuff is kind of hard to find. But you know, if you talk to somebody in your fly shop, they can get it. I think Orvis carries it as well, but it's a little wider, it's a little stiffer than Flashabou or regular Flashabou. But I'm going to take one strand. So I'm going to put one stripe or one piece down each side. So I'm going to pull it up on top, fold it over, and then wrap back toward the eyes. One piece on each side. The length, may adjust that later. And then we're going to finish up the fly by putting the top on it. See if I can use the rest of that EP fiber. I have to cut a bit more. One thing about EP fiber, when you take it out of the package, what I do is, you can see here, I'll put a wire tie, one of those zip ties, around it. And I'll take it out of the package, put a zip tie around it, zip it up, and then you've got a bunch of EP fibers up there. You know, I try not to waste as much, as little as possible. And then I'll light it, and this stuff burns really well, and it melts down into a perfect little. And it's so much easier to work with when you've got it zip tied like that. And the other thing is don't cut random down. That is a go-to fly. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to tie, and a lot of these patterns are very, very easy to tie. You may not see these in fly shops, but if you're just starting out fly tying,
Sure. Hey, Pat, we just had a request. Can you show the strip of flies, the blue one or the gray one?
Oh, yeah. You bet. You bet. Absolutely. So I knew I was coming up here to give a presentation on white bass, and so I wanted to kind of tie some flies that these are all tied by Texas Tires, and a lot of them have kind of gained a following either regionally or with members of certain clubs or whatnot. And I'll just try to go through them, fairly quickly here, one by one. And let's see here. The first one here is this little guy right here. And again, that is the Moreau fly, M-O-R-E-A-U, I believe is how you spelled his last name, Andy Moreau. He was a guide on the Brazos, and he tied that, and a lot of folks that go fish the Nolan swear by that thing. You can tie it in all different colors. I would suggest tying that with 4-strand floss, at least the body. Even with 210 denier thread, it takes a while to build up that little cone shape. But if you don't have 1/64 ounce jigs, and I was really happy to see that, like Barlow's is right next door. I guarantee you those guys do. And I just didn't get here early enough to stop by there. But
you're not doing any in-person business.
oh, really? It's all online. All online? Okay. There was a reason there. But if you don't have the 1/64 ounce jig heads or don't want to order any, if you've got some jig hooks, some little 60-degree jig hooks that you use to tie trout nymphs on, put a small brass or tungsten bead on there, and it's the same thing. But that's 5 pieces of crystal flash off the back. This is red 210 denier Danville's thread for the body, coated with Sally Hansen's hard as nails. Again, if you can have the 4-strand rayon floss by Danville's is thicker. It's like a 400 denier, so you can build the body up, but it still lays flat. Tied in any color you want. The second fly here, and pretty much if you fish for white bass in Texas, either you've got some of these in your box, or you fish, or you've heard of them. and heard of the legend. That's Mr. Charlie Cypher. That's his famous Cypher minnow in chartreuse, and that one's tied on a 6. And it's caught fish everywhere. You can tie it on a saltwater hook. It's in the Greg Burlocker's book, Texas Saltwater Classics. He just ties it on a long shank, I think it's a 34001 Mustad stainless hook. But catches reds and specks down there, but tied in smaller versions. Like I said, this is a 6. I'll often tie it down to a size 10, and it's just a deadly fly. Tied in whatever, whatever colors. Tied in whatever colors, you want to. Gray, white, chartreuse, light blue. They all work. So that's Cypher's minnow. And this is a fly, I really don't know. I know Charlie Cypher tied them. I don't know if he invented this or not, because it's called a Mylar or Marabou Minnow. And it's the next fly I'm going to tie. It's a very easy fly, but again, it catches fish. It's almost kind of a woolly bugger without the hackle. And there was a lot of debate in our club down in Waco that somebody there came up with the pattern, or if Charlie came up with the pattern or whatever. I'm kind of thinking it's got a marabou tail and it's got a chenille body on it, on a hook with a little bit of flash. Somebody's probably done that before y'all. Either one of y'all. It's not, So I don't know who the originator of it was, but again, this one's in gray, white, chartreuse, light blue, size 6, 8s, 10s. You can vary the weight from bead chain if you want to put lead eyes on them. It's a killer fly. The next fly comes from a gentleman by the name of Bruce Young down at the Alamo Fly Fishers. And this is a pattern he came up with while fishing on the Colorado at Bend, the Colorado Bend State Park. This is called, and it's basically, it's a clouser, high tie style. So basically everything's on the top except this little tuft of red yarn. And it's got peacock and root beer crystal flash, and that's it. That's the whole fly. And since it didn't have any bucktail on it, they didn't know what to call it. So somebody said, well, clouser are kind of naked. So they called it the Naked Lady Clouser. So, ladies in the audience, forgive me, I did not come up with that name, but that is the name. If you Google such, be careful what you Google. You might want to tack on Alamo Fly Fishers after the Naked Lady Clouser. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, that's that fly. Then here's the fly that I just tied. That's my Pat's Ghost Minnow. This is in a size, that's in a size 10. That's a small one. And that is just deadly.
What is that white material?
The white material is called Sinyo's Laser Dub. Okay, and there's two types. There's Sinyo's Laser Dub, which is a bit more kind of spongy and fine. Then there's Sinyo's Fusion Dub, and I think it's a little bit more coarse. I think it's got a bit more flash in it. But I like the Laser Dub. It's real cottony. Then a gentleman up down near Granbury, Lake Granbury on the Brazos, he tied this pattern. Again, pretty simple. He took a Mustad 3366 hook and like a number 6 or 8, slipped on a brass bead and tied some bucktail and a couple of strands of flash. And he calls that Richard Hart with his name, and it's called Hart's Ghost Minnow. So again, it's kind of like a clouser, but with just a bead on the front of it. Now, this is the coolest fly, I think, in the whole group. And if you've got one of Bud Pretty's Fly Fishing the Texas Hill Country books, I think this was the 2nd edition that came out, where he actually had colored pictures of flies in it. You'll find this fly, and it's called the Mr. Magoo. And way back in the day, when I first started getting interested in fly fishing for white bass, I read all these different articles by Billy Trimble and Joe Robinson in these magazines and talking about fishing at Reimers and, you know, always wanting to go there. Of course, you know, I didn't have wheels, and that was way down in Austin, and didn't know that I had a ton of white bass right there in my backyard. But just, you know, he was always talking about some of the patterns that he fished, and kind of like bonefish patterns, like Crazy Charlie's, because they rode hook point up, inverted, and they resembled a small minnow and kind of worked well in the rocks on the Pedernales there. So he came up with this fly. Again, it's very, very reminiscent of a bonefish fly, except that it's not really weighted. This is tied on one of the Umpqua X Series bend back hooks. I think that's a size 6 right there, if I'm not mistaken. But the new Umpqua X Series, and it's got a really long number, forgive me, I don't know the number of that. But Joe, I think, tied his originally on a stainless steel mustad and just bent it for the bend back. And it's just got some pearl flashabou or opal flashabou wrapped underneath some either vinyl D-rib or clear vinyl tubing, some white calf tail, and a few strands of pearl flashabou up top. And these are like little 5mm.
Now hold it down just a bit.
I'm sorry. 5mm red eyes. And then I put some, you can put DevCon or whatever on them. I use just some of the UV, any of the thick or thin UV glues or resins that are available today, Loon, whatever. Just pick your poison. There's several of them out there. That's the Mr. Magoo. You're going to need a sink tip to fish this one because, again, it's unweighted, so it's not going to sink very fast. But that's a really cool fly. And again, Joe Robinson is, you know, Austin angler. He's one of the Texas fly fishing legends. So, and speaking of another Texas fly fishing legend, the last one we've got here, this was featured in an issue of Southwest Fly Fishing. I don't remember the exact issue, but this is called the B&D Special, tied by, I think, Bud Pretty and Dudley Sanford came up with this fly fishing on the Colorado River. This, again, is a bend back. Give you a better shot of that. There. Again, it's a bend back fly tied on that same X Series, number 6, Umpqua X Series bend back hook. I did underwrap the body here with some like 020 lead, some really fine blue chenille, and then olive over white calf tail with a little olive crystal flash in it. And they came up with that after the story goes that Bud Pretty snagged a minnow one time when he's fishing down there at Bend, Colorado Bend State Park. They took the minnow in and studied it and said it had these colors on it, and that's kind of what they came out with. So again, so there they are, and you know, for you folks to look at here. All right, so I'm going to tie y'all that Mylar or Marabou Minnow. I'm going to go ahead and just tie that one in gray.
Pat, can we pass that one around the room?
Absolutely, you can.
I better kick you. See how many flies are here.
See if I'm going to get to be the last guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a 3XL nymph hook. Again, kind of pick your poison. This was probably a company that is not making fly hooks anymore, Dairiki, I think. But Daiichi, Mustad, Tiemco, they all make a 3XL long nymph hook. Most all the companies do. So this is a size 8. And so we're going to start with, if I can find it, a box of goodies here. Or some more V-chain eyes, I think. So large V-chain eyes in silver. We're going to place these fairly close, probably about 2 hook eye lengths back from the start. I'm just using gray thread to match. I don't think the thread color really matters because all it's going to show is just up by the nose.
You fish all of these on the same line?
Sink tip, generally, like a 10-foot sink tip. Just busted my gray thread there, and so I'm just going to go with this gray-brown UTC thread. This last time there again, just for time's sake, I would usually put a spot of super glue right there over those eyes, just to keep them from rolling around. First material that we're going to put in is just a Marabou and your Flashaboo. Yes. Kind of helps wrapping that underbody. Helps wrap it quicker. And then any type of clear D-rib. This is beadle-on. This is kind of for making necklaces and bracelets. It's a 0.80 millimeter or 0.032 inch clear stretchable kind of thing, and it makes great transparent or see-through bodies. Now, when you're overwrapping these this style fly, kind of you find a lot of it in saltwater patterns, Crazy Charlies and whatnot. It's always good to cut kind of a taper in the end of your material if you can get away with it. I always like to kind of pre-stretch this material out a little bit. But I'm going to take that and I'm just going to try to catch the very end of that. And once I do, one good thing about this GSP, it's very strong, and I'm going to really lash that down. You see, I'm pulling back on that and I'm putting a lot of pressure on my vise and that plastic. I want that to be as thin as possible back there, otherwise you're going to have this big ugly hump. Again, the fish don't care, but you want it to be pretty in your box, or you're probably not ever going to fish the darn thing. You know, it's just going to sit there for years collecting dust. So we're going to advance our thread up to the front, right there about the bend. And we're going to take our, and I'm sorry for those of you watching online, my hands are probably going to get in the way, but we're just going to take this open flash and we're going to wrap it an underbody all the way up over the thread. And you can do the same thing with Flashaboo. It'd probably be easier with Flashaboo if you put in about 4 or 5 pieces and just grab them all at the same time and wrapped. But this lateral scale is some pretty tough material and it's a little bit wider, so it allows me to get up the hook shank a little quicker with it. Still kind of a tedious process. If you want, if you've got a rotary vise like I do, you can use the rotary feature on your vise. Wrap that. snip off the tab. Just throw a quick half hitch on there real quick. So I don't want to lose any of that. All right, now we're going to just take our plastic rib, whatever you have, D-rib, vinyl D-rib, midge tubing, what have you. And it's always the first couple of wraps are always the hardest to start, so I like to take my hook and turn it down in the vise like that. Kind of give me a bit of a level platform. And we're just going to keep a lot of tension on that material. And we're just going to work it up the body, touching turns. Just beyond the bend on that particular hook. Give it several good wraps. Really torque down on it there. As you know, if you're tired and you're tying anything in elastic, if you don't tie it in well, it's gonna slip on you and fire out. So there we've got our underbody there. Again, it's a little bit thicker where I over tied that, but not much. Like I said, if you've got some material that you can really slim down, you can make that little hump there a lot less noticeable. Fish probably won't eat this one. All right. Let's see.
Fish don't care if there's a hump on there, they probably can't even see it.
They don't care about this big hook thing sticking up from the back of it.
They're looking for a snack.
That's right, that's right. So, I'm going to take some white calf tail. This is a great material. If you can find good ones, this is a great material to tie smaller clousers out of, especially white bass clousers, because it's almost translucent. It's got a very nice sheen to it, and I am down to the absolute last bit of this.
You got your money's worth.
I did. I certainly did.
Can you show the label on that one here?
Yeah, it's just a rump calf tail, kip tail in white. And again, when you're sourcing any type of natural materials, whether it be bucktail, calf tail, or whatever, marabou, any type of material that came off of a living critter, take it out of the pack. If you can avoid ordering it online, I would probably suggest that. And I would suggest taking it out of the, going to a fly shop and taking it out of the package and looking at it. Because not all packages of this stuff are the same. Go down to Round Rock, down to Living Waters. If you've been down there, Chris Johnson. Chris is a good friend of mine. Go down to his fly shop and he just shakes his head at me when I'm over there opening up all of his packages of bucktail, marabou, feathers. And probably shoot me if I opened up his whiting feathers. He likes his whiting feathers. So, kiptail, this is not a compressible hair like bucktail. So it's very slippery, like squirrel tail.
So what are you looking for when you're opening up the packages?
I'm just looking for, like if I'm looking for like kiptail, I'm looking for stuff that's, you know, it's got really long fibers throughout the tail. See, like a lot of this down here on the bottom, this is a great color to make my, you know, brown clousers out of, but it's just too darn short. I could maybe make some tins out of this if I got lucky. but it's just too darn short. And a lot of times you'll see that really short stuff like this. You'll see that all the way down the tail on a kit tail. And it's just, if you buy that, you're stuck with it. I've mail ordered natural materials before, and you just, golly, I got a package of schlappen one time, and I'm like, what did you do to the bird before you picked the schlappen off of it? I mean, it looked like roadkill. And, you can't really ship it back. So, again, I always make sure it's what I want. A lot of the marabou sometimes will be matted. During the dyeing process, it'll stick it together. You can comb that out. But just look to make sure that it's kind of what you want as far as maybe the length of hair. Some of the pieces of like deer hair for spinning bass bugs with, sometimes they're all, when they dye it and they dry it, the leather will curl up and it bends the fibers of the hair. And so I'm looking for a good flat piece of leather where all the hair is kind of all the same way. So this is probably not the most optimal piece of kit tail ever. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Just keep yelling at me and telling me to move, Pat, because that's why I've got these glasses on, and they don't work that well sometimes. Okay, so we've got that kit tail tied in there. And we're going to put a couple of strands of just regular old pearl Flashabou out over the back of it. This is the bigger one, so we'll probably pieces. Just one more piece, and then just tie that right on top. One more piece here. Okay, so as our friends across the pond say, that's the tying done. Just got to put the eyes on. Take this fly hair and we're just going to trim some of that Flashabou. It's really long, so we're just going to trim it about the length. Maybe some a little shorter, about the length of the calf tail. So right now we've just basically got a bend back fly. You can throw that for redfish, you can throw that off the dock at night down at Port O'Connor. Catch a lot of specks on it, but what we're going to do is we're going to, as Joe Robinson did, we're going to put some red eyes on this thing and make it kind of really come alive. These are just 5mm opaque red eyes, stick-on eyes. These are domed 3D eyes. Normally, I would take a drop of super glue, gel super glue, put those on. Since I don't have that, I'm going to have to make these things just stick on there. Put some UV cheer on there, and that will weld them. I hope I can get this done. I hope they will cooperate and stick somewhat. Of course, they're not going to. So, just put that on there and see if we can get it.
So could you put a flat bead on there and stick those eyes on there, or is the point not to have the weight?
You could put a bead on there. You could be Jane eyes.